let's dive right into the only completely unsolved case of air piracy in U.S. commercial aviation history. We are talking about the absolute legend that is the mystery of D.B. Cooper. Using entirely declassified FBI files from the Norjack investigation and historical records, we're going to reconstruct exactly what happened on that fateful night. I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit next to me. Just imagine reading those exact words. It was Thanksgiving Eve, November 24, 1971. A completely unassuming man wearing a dark business suit, a white shirt, and a black clip-on tie handed a note with that terrifying threat to a 23-year-old flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She was just working a totally routine short-hop flight from Portland to Seattle on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. But the second she read that note, a ticking clock of sheer suspense was set into motion. So let's kick things off with the threat on Flight 305, where a high-stakes hostage situation begins to unfold. The whole thing actually started that afternoon when a man, using the alias Dan Cooper, paid cash for a one-way ticket in Portland. Shortly after takeoff, after passing that infamous note, Cooper calmly opened his briefcase for the flight attendant, and right there inside, she saw what looked like 8 red sticks of dynamite, all wired up to a battery. He coldly laid out his demands, and the pilots were suddenly forced into a terrifying reality. They had to fly their Boeing 727 in an endless holding pattern, circling the dark skies above Seattle for an hour and a half, while authorities on the ground scrambled to get this hijacker exactly what he wanted. And what he wanted was massive. To put the sheer scale of this heist into perspective, he demanded $200,000 in unmarked, non-sequential $20 bills. If you adjust that for inflation, we're talking roughly $1.2 to $1.5 million today. But he didn't just want the cash. He also demanded 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserves, and he insisted on having a fuel truck standing ready on the tarmac the absolute second they touched down.
Moving right along to the ransom and the reroute as demands are met on the ground in Seattle.
Okay, so at 5:45 p.m., Flight 305 finally touches down. Out on a remote, pitch-black section of the tarmac, this incredibly tense trade takes place. Federal authorities had frantically gathered the $10,000 $20 bills from a local bank, plus parachutes from a nearby skydiving school. Once the cash and the chutes were brought aboard, Cooper actually stayed true to his word. He released all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants. But the nightmare wasn't over for the flight crew. By 7:36 p.m., after some refueling delays, he forced them back into the night sky. He initially demanded to be flown to Mexico City, though they ultimately had to agree on a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Now, here's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Cooper's highly specific flight configuration demands. He ordered the crew to fly below 10,000 feet, to keep the landing gear down, set the wing flaps at exactly 15 degrees, and, most importantly, to leave the rear ventral air stair open and extended. These precise demands are huge. They show that Cooper had a very intimate, maybe military or intelligence level understanding of the Boeing 727. It was actually one of the only commercial aircraft in the world that could fly with its rear stairs deployed, which, incredibly, is a feature the CIA used for covert drops in Vietnam.
Which brings us to a cinematic climax, a literal leap into darkness.
The timeline of the jump itself is just chillingly precise. At 8:05 p.m., the crew communicates with Cooper for the very last time. Then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the isolated crew up in the cockpit feels a sudden, distinct pressure change, followed by an oscillation, like a sudden bump in the aircraft's tail section. Investigators are convinced this marks the exact moment the heavy air stair rebounded from his exit. When the plane finally landed in Reno with the stairway damaged, the cabin was completely empty. D.B. Cooper was gone. I mean, just visualize the absolute madness of this moment. D.B. Cooper plummets into a freezing 170-knot thunderstorm right over the incredibly dense Washington wilderness. And remember his outfit? He's wearing a thin business suit, a lightweight raincoat, and slip-on loafers. Plunging into a violent storm using a non-steerable military parachute, totally surrounded by pitch-black darkness and sub-freezing temperatures, Cooper essentially leapt straight into a void. Next up, we have the Norjack evidence and the massive manhunt that followed. You'd think there would be a mountain of evidence left behind, right? But actually, when the FBI processed the aircraft, they found an incredibly meager collection of clues. They recovered 2 of the parachutes, and interestingly, he took an older military primary chute and inexplicably grabbed a non-functional dummy reserve chute. They found a ripped placard from the stairs. There were 8 Raleigh cigarette butts, which, tragically for the case, were lost before modern DNA testing even existed. But arguably the most fascinating clue? That black clip-on tie.
Years later, under an electron microscope, it was found to contain trace particles of rare metals like unalloyed titanium and bismuth. This heavily suggests that Cooper might have actually worked in some kind of specialized aerospace or chemical manufacturing facility. Outside of the plane, the case remained completely, totally cold. Not a single physical lead. Until almost a decade later. On February 10, 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit in the sand at Tina Bar, right along the Columbia River. Amazingly, he uncovers 294 decaying $20 bills. The serial numbers? A perfect match to the ransom. The rubber bands were even still intact. And this sparked a massive, fierce debate that continues today. Did that money wash downstream naturally, or was it deliberately buried there by human hands?
The sheer scale and, honestly, the exhaustion of this manhunt over the decades is staggering. The Norjack investigation lasted an incredible 45 years and scrutinized over 1,000 serious suspects. If you look at modern data repositories today, like the DB Cooper text dataset on Hugging Face, you'll find over 44,000 rows of extracted text. We are talking tens of thousands of declassified pages of witness descriptions, prison parole reports, and dead-end tips. It perfectly captures how Cooper's composite sketch became the face of 1,000 different men in the public's imagination. So, who actually did it? Let's take a look at the prime suspects. Out of those thousands of individuals investigated, 3 major names really stand out. First, you've got Richard McCoy Jr., a Green Beret, who executed a practically identical copycat hijacking just months later, bailing out of a 727 with $500,000. Then there's Robert Rockstraw, a decorated Vietnam paratrooper with a criminal record, who later faked his own death. And finally, Kenneth Christiansen, who actually worked as a mechanic and flight attendant for Northwest Orient, the same airline, and inexplicably bought a house with cash just a year after the hijacking. Yet, despite all these wild coincidences and backgrounds, none of these prime suspects could ever be definitively biologically linked to the physical evidence left on Flight 305. And so, after 45 long years of frustrating dead ends, lost evidence, and wild goose chases, on July 8, 2016, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation. They concluded that they had finally exhausted all credible leads and just needed to reallocate their resources to other pressing priorities. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved, and the hijacker's true identity is completely unknown. As we wrap up this explainer, we are left staring at the ultimate unresolved question. Did a daring, remarkably calm amateur skydiver pull off the absolute perfect crime, land safely in the dead of night, and completely vanish into a new life with the money? Or was his entire plan fundamentally flawed, leaving his remains and the rest of that massive ransom still hidden away somewhere in the rugged, unforgiving Pacific Northwest wilderness? It is a mystery that just continues to captivate us all. And perhaps, just perhaps, that one final, undeniable clue is still out there, waiting to be found.